Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
This has been a week of extraordinary events at Westminster, and today is no exception. As we go on air, MPs are about to vote on whether to ask the European Union to extend the Brexit deadline beyond the current March 29th. It could be a short delay till the end of June to enable Theresa May to have a third attempt at getting her withdrawal agreement through Parliament. In the last few minutes, MPs, by the narrowest of margins, rejected the chance to have a series of votes next week in which they would have had a greater say in the Brexit process. Let's go straight to our political editor, Laura Kunsberg. Laura.
George, well, as you suggest, in the last few minutes, the government has narrowly avoided losing charge completely of the Brexit process. For weeks, a group of MPs from different political parties have been trying to take control of the agenda to move to a situation where Parliament, not the Prime Minister, would determine what happens next. That failed, but only just. And despite that, in the next half hour, the Prime Minister is likely to face something she said she would never allow: a delay to Brexit, our future dangling maybe till the end of June. Ready for another vital skirmish in what feels like a never-ending conflict. This place can't agree on a way to leave the EU. So tonight, MPs with the choice to delay our departure from the Union.
The ayes to the right, 312. The noes to the left, 314.
In the last 15 minutes, the government only just squeezed through surviving a vote that would have delayed Brexit and grabbed charge from them too. That didn't win, but right now, another vote to delay is going on. Theresa May's promise we'd leave at the end of this month will almost certainly be broken. Brexit dangling.
Seeking an extension to Article 50 is not something that the government ever wanted to have to do. We believe that we negotiated a good deal for this country, and one that also respected the result of the referendum and would have allowed the United Kingdom to leave the European Union on the 29th of March this year.
It's no good the Prime Minister and the government blaming everyone but themselves for the position we find ourselves in. To be in government is to govern, to lead. Because here we are with 15 days to go. Article 50 extension is a necessity, not a choice. It's the only way to try to prevent leaving without a deal on the 29th of March.
MPs didn't manage to take control of the agenda to vote on different versions of Brexit, but the government's had to promise that could happen soon. But what would a delay be for?
None of those of us who've put this forward prefer to grab the order paper. None of us prefer these elaborate devices to achieve this. We seek, above all and only, to ensure that the House has the opportunity to rescue our fellow citizens from a fate that both he and I wish to avoid.
But with no obvious majority in Parliament for anything, what would a delay achieve?
Everybody's got a different idea, but they're not actually doing the negotiations. And as far as my residents are concerned, and I reckon most residents of most constituencies in this country, they just want the deal done.
Even if we do come to a consensus to extend Article 50, any one of the 27 countries in the EU could veto that extension.
We demand a people's vote!
An attempt by a small group of MPs to call for another referendum was smashed. The Labour Party didn't support it, even though officially they say they might back another vote.
Where do we want it? Now!
Will Brexit be delayed, Chief Whip?
But for number 10, even though discipline fell apart last night, with cabinet ministers voting a different way to the Prime Minister, Theresa May's still pushing her deal. And is that the sound of one of the allies she needs tiptoeing towards saying yes?
When you come to the end of a negotiation, that's when you really start to see the whites of people's eyes, if you like, and you get down to the point where you make a deal. And we want to see a deal because we want a deal that's good for the whole of the United Kingdom, and that's what we're focusing on.
Not yet. Dozens of Brexiteers still believe the Prime Minister's deal with the EU is too close, too tightly bound. But tempers are fraying.
They are engaging in political idiocy. They are doing more to damage the prospect of us ever leaving the European Union than any of the people campaigning for a second losers vote or Remainers who haven't accepted the result. They are dangerously close to destroying the very thing it is that we all fought so long and hard to achieve.
That's what it's come down to, Tory MPs calling each other idiots, basically. You're saying that dozens of your colleagues are idiots.
No, I'm saying they're engaging in political idiocy, which is exactly what it is.
If you don't fight for something you believe in, which is Brexit, then it seems to me you've given up the fight far too early. You shouldn't be in politics.
Just in case the Prime Minister didn't have enough woe at home, that supposed special friend couldn't help but pitch in too.
I'm surprised at how badly it's all gone from the standpoint of a negotiation. But I gave the Prime Minister my ideas on how to negotiate it, and I think you would have been successful. She didn't listen to that, and that's fine. I mean, she's got to do what she's got to do.
To do what she has to do? If only it were so simple. Number 10 must try to govern this mess and survive. There's never been any shortage of tips and helpful advice for the Prime Minister from all over the place, whether here or across the Atlantic. But it is a relief for her in Number 10 that in the last few minutes Parliament has failed, only just, but failed to grab control from Number 10 of this whole process. But tonight, it is going to be a big moment. It's very likely, although not certain, that MPs will vote to put Brexit on hold. That's a promise that Theresa May never wanted to have to break.
Laura, for now, thank you. So, after today's vote, all eyes turn to next week, when more MPs will be asked to change their minds and back Theresa May's deal, along with a short delay to Brexit, or face a much longer delay if it's rejected. Our deputy political editor, John Pienaar, has been looking at how the next stages of Brexit may play out.
One thing we do know, inside an hour, MPs will vote to delay Brexit past March the 29th. They don't know for how long, and nor do we. Theresa May never wanted this, but she's been weakened by defeat after defeat in the Commons. Her aim now, with less than a week to the next EU summit, to somehow win round 75 or more Tory Brexiteers, Democratic Unionists, Leave supporting Labour MPs who want a Brexit deal. It's a big ask, so Theresa May will be calling another big debate, another big vote, before she faces EU leaders and asks for the delay in leaving. Time's running out to finally support this battered Prime Minister or start to thrash out a new plan for Brexit. So aside from Mrs May's plan, what are the other options MPs will try to drum up support for behind the scenes? Well, some on both sides, including cabinet ministers like Amber Rudd, would like a Brexit closer to the EU, a bit like Norway's, sticking with EU market rules and standards, maybe also the EU customs system. No new trade tariffs or border checks, no problem avoiding stops and checks on the Irish border. But it also means no new trade deals around the world. Jeremy Corbyn and Labour want a customs union. He says he can negotiate terms to his liking. Then there's another referendum. MPs were never likely to back a referendum this evening, but the so-called People's Vote campaigners will be back. What will the EU make of it all? In Brussels next week, EU leaders must decide whether to grant a Brexit delay at all. Signs are they will, but there may be strings attached. Will France impose conditions? Will Spain, where elections are on the way, reopen the sovereignty of Gibraltar? And crucially, will they insist on a long delay, a year or more, till the Brits agree on Brexit? The Prime Minister's hoping fear of a long delay, the possibility of being tied to EU rules, maybe even a referendum, will persuade or scare MPs into backing her deal as the best available. Some legal guidance from the Attorney General that the UK might be able to legally break with EU rules if Britain feels trapped. That might help rebels climb down too. If she wins, it'll be a triumph. Britain could begin the even tougher task of discussing the future after Brexit, even if many Tory MPs and ministers are saying quietly that'll be a job for a new Prime Minister, that Mrs May's time may finally be running out.
John Pienaar reporting there. Now, in a moment, we'll hear more from Laura Koonsberg in Westminster. But first, let's go to Brussels and talk to our Europe editor, Katja Adler. Katja, now, if we are in the position that we're looking for a delay of some kind, is the EU likely to agree?
Yes, George, because you see, for all of the sound and fury that we're seeing at the moment in Westminster when it comes to the idea of extending the Brexit process, it's EU leaders who have the final say. So, will they say yes? Will they say no? For how long could the extension be? What kind of conditions will be attached? Like so many things with Brexit at the moment, George, we just don't know for sure. Certainly this week we had some very tough words from a number of EU leaders like France and Spain saying they would not grant an extension unless the Prime Minister came up with a very good reason why, she said. And it is true, EU leaders are frustrated, irritated, fatigued with the Brexit process. But it's also true that they want to avoid a no-deal Brexit for their own economic and political reasons. So look, under EU law, all 27 EU leaders have to come to a unanimous decision on this, and that's why we can't know for sure what they will decide until they're all in a room together, which they will be a week from today at an EU summit here in Brussels. And it's likely, George, that realpolitik will then prevail, so that whether it's a shorter extension, if the Prime Minister can persuade the EU that she's almost there with her deal, or if it's a longer extension, they will probably say yes, even if it's through gritted teeth.
Laura, let me come to you again. I mean, this is extraordinary, I said at the beginning of the programme. Just 15 days to go and so much still up in the air.
That's right, George. I mean, for once, actually, on this side of the channel and the other, politicians have something in common. As Katia was saying, people here also feel exhausted, irritated, fatigued, but also trying to avoid no-deal departure at the end of this month, which is why right now MPs are filing through the voting lobbies on a plan to delay Brexit until the end of June. That does seem now inevitable, although if the Prime Minister's deal goes through at some point in the next week, it might possibly happen a little bit earlier if MPs work their socks off and manage to get the legislation passed. But it is a still very big if over whether or not Theresa May can get her deal through. And if she still can't, well, goodness me, you think that things feel up in the air right now? Wait until that happens.
Laura, Katia, thank you both very much.
In a narrow Commons victory this evening, the government fought off an attempt by MPs to take control of Brexit in Parliament. Instead, Theresa May was presented with a stark choice to MPs: back her deal in another vote next week or risk a long delay to Brexit, and even the possibility of having to hold European elections in May. MPs are now expected to have a third meaningful vote on Brexit next week. That's just before Theresa May heads off to Brussels for what is currently set to be the last European summit with the British Prime Minister at the table. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, is with me now. Gary.
Well, let's look at the ledger for today. Theresa May has avoided defeat. There's a novelty, but very, very narrowly. And the people who were trying to defeat her, parliamentarians who wanted to take back control of the Brexit process away from the executive, are going to come back if they possibly can, and they are very intent on it. It was a very narrow victory. She has had to extend the date she said that would never change. She has had to acknowledge that she's so close to the wire now, even if she gets her deal, she'll have to extend it. But she's only had to concede in Parliament that she's interested in that short extension in order to tidy up a deal if it goes through. So she's kept a little bit of
short?
Potentially to the up to the European elections and just beyond. She has got her deal still in play, she thinks. As you said, it's going to be up in front of Parliament again, but the mountain is huge that she has to climb. And some Tory MPs, recalcitrant rebels, even the ones who are thinking of coming back, are saying the price for coming back might be her making the ultimate political sacrifice and giving them an early date for when she is going. And then, on top of all of this, can discipline hold for her to even get to that near point in the horizon? Because in the vote tonight, when Parliament was agreeing to the government's motion, saying that maybe that we need a short extension if the Act passes, the withdrawal agreement, in order to tidy it up, in the lobbies there were cabinet ministers who were voting against the government line, and some whips as well, and that was them giving a two-fingered salute to number 10, who they think let some pro-Remain ministers off the leash and allowed them to abstain yesterday. The overwhelming feeling you have here is that there is incredible fatigue, incredible rattiness, and an awful lot of people who can't get away from this building soon enough and are dying for the weekend to start.
Order! Order! Division! Clear the lobby!
The ayes to the right, 312. The noes to the left, 314.
A rare moment these days, a government victory on Brexit, knocking back an attempt by MPs to take control of the Brexit process. Though the government has conceded it will let MPs choose options for Brexit later in March if the Prime Minister's own Brexit divorce deal hasn't got through. At Cabinet, the pro-Remain ministers who abstained last night, including everyone in this picture apart from Chris Grayling, were ticked off by the Prime Minister. Last night they defied a whip to show their hostility to no deal. The Prime Minister condemned ministers for posturing and attacked Cabinet leaks. One parliamentary aide actually lost his job for voting against the government line last night.
I think there's a real problem here that the government seems to just be trying to get through day to day. All it's seeing is the next immediate vote. How do we get through that? What are the concessions and compromises we need to get through now, at a complete absence of a longer term strategy? And often, you make a concession to get through today, but in doing so you're only storing yourself up more problems for 3 days, a week later. And I think that's what we're seeing.
This is an appalling way to describe a government you were a member of until yesterday.
Well, no, I think
day-to-day management, really no strategy.
Well, I think that's clear to anyone looking inside.
Theresa May's plan to get a grip is to scare pro-Brexit Tory rebels with their worst nightmares. Extended delay, a journey into the unknown, perhaps the loss of Brexit altogether.
Her policy has always been to frighten us into voting for this deal, and that's what's going on now. It's very clear to me and all of us.
In one of this evening's votes, Theresa May paused to have a picture taken with one MP's toddler, but she is ruthlessly trying to undermine other Brexit options to keep MPs focused on her deal. A deputy insisted the votes MPs were demanding to pick alternative approaches would all require very long delays to the Brexit date.
The purpose of this amendment is to facilitate, within the period of a short extension, a 3-month extension and not a long one, the ability of this House, by some mechanism, actually to debate and resolve the question of a deal across the parties.
I simply do not think that the European Council would see it as plausible to agree a 3-month extension without much greater clarity about what, not just the process, but about an outcome in this hypothetical scenario.
This is negotiable within a few weeks, and then we just need to put the legislation through. Absolutely possible to reach an agreement on doing
David
it by the end
Livingstone
of
says
June.
nothing's ever negotiable in a few weeks with the EU.
But he would say that, wouldn't he? He's trying to get people to vote for the Prime Minister's deal.
One of the other horrors for Brexiteers, a second referendum. It got a failed premature test of strength in the Commons. The newly formed independent group of MPs called a vote, but Labour said it was aimed at humiliating them.
Because I'm afraid the chances are that the Labour front bench will never move to a position of wholeheartedly and unequivocally supporting a people's vote unless there is some significant pressure to do so.
But I'm afraid that Labour will be found out for what they are, a fraud, and they're participating in Brexit happening if they fail to back the people's vote this afternoon.
Great rhetoric, no substance.
Labour's Keir Starmer said now was not the moment to test the strength of second referendum support. Only 85 MPs backed the move. More than half the House voted against it. In Washington, the DUP leader, Arlene Foster, signalled her party hadn't yet turned its back on the divorce deal.
We're talking to the government and the Attorney General at the moment to try and make a deal happen, because we want to see Brexit working. We want to see it working for the whole of the United Kingdom and in a way that doesn't leave Northern Ireland behind.
Other opponents of the Brexit deal insist Theresa May's scare tactics won't convert them. A promise of an early departure might. If she promises to go, your vote might be biddable.
That would certainly put a huge different reflection on the whole thing. Yes, it would.
And go quickly.
Yes.
Parliament didn't seize back control today. If the Prime Minister's deal doesn't pass next week, Not yet.
Well, I'm joined now by the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. Matt Hancock, the Leader of the House, Liz Truss, Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Gavin Williamson, the Defence Secretary, Steve Barclay, for goodness sake, the Brexit Secretary. These, in this free vote, voted against the government. What on earth's going on?
Well, as you say, there was a free vote tonight, but what we've seen tonight is the government's strategy to deliver the deal that's been negotiated and to try to make sure that we leave the EU on the 29th of March, if possible, with a deal. That is what we supported. It's what I supported. There was a free vote. People have very strong views on this matter. You know that.
Collective responsibility is right down, finished, no more.
No, certainly not. There was a free vote.
No, I mean, cabinet collective responsibility is an absolute in the parliamentary system.
No, as you could see, there was a free vote on that matter, that motion, but we had 6 votes tonight, and it's very important that we see what happened in each one of them, because we had a vote on whether we should have a second referendum, and that was emphatically rejected. More than half the House voted against that.
This is a government in total disarray. Last night, 2 other members of the government voted. That was not a free vote, and they voted against the government. They haven't been sacked. Where is the government now? It's a complete shambles.
Well, the government minister last night who voted against has resigned, yes, and tonight there was a free vote on one of the motions, but there was, we also emphatically won the vote against the second referendum. I think that's a good thing, because a second referendum would be so divisive, wouldn't solve anything. And also the Labour Party...
That's pretty narrow, isn't it?
Well,
it'll come back to haunt you.
A win's a win, John, and the House of Commons made it clear what its view is. And on the second referendum, the margin was over 200. It was an absolutely emphatic decision, and I think that's important.
Now, how long is this extension going to be?
Well, I hope that we don't have to have an extension at all. That is extremely difficult. But
what on earth is going to happen in the next 15 days that is in some way going to stop you having to have an extension?
Well, I very much hope that we can bring back a meaningful vote on the Prime Minister's deal, and I hope that that is supported at last.
Been defeated by 220 once, by 149 the second time. You're just hoping you'll gradually erode it. That's not democracy, Minister. That is not democracy.
Well, the challenge we've had over the last few months is that the House of Commons has been very clear what it's against, but not what it's for. And what the votes tonight, and in fact last night, have been doing is narrowing down those options, taking options off the table.
But you're crawling to Europe as a supplicant. You've got no power in the game at all. You've given it all away. There's nothing. You've got to go there and say, can we have an extension? Well, how much extension will you allow? What will you do if they said you can have an extension, but it's going to be for 2 years and you're going to have to elect some MEPs? They might do that, and that might be unanimous in Europe.
Well, I think that a long extension like that would be a disaster. I think people want to get on with this. When I talk to constituents, when I talk to people in the NHS, when I talk to business... So you rule it out.
2 years is out. Absolutely out.
I absolutely
don't... You'll resign if they go for 2 years.
I don't want to see that.
You'll resign if they go for 2 years.
No. I don't want to see that.
You don't feel very strongly then?
Yes, I do. And I'll tell you what I feel strongly for, and that's delivering on the referendum result and making sure we do it in a way that is good for this country. And we can do that by having a meaningful vote in the next week, I hope.
Secretary of State, you know better than I do that Parliament is, for once, deeply representative of the country. It's completely asunder. Nobody in the country knows what's going on. Nobody in there knows what's going on. And you know nothing about what's going on, even inside the Cabinet. The Cabinet is at sea, the country's at sea. We are a laughingstock.
Is that a question or just your position?
I'm putting it to you.
Well, it's your view.
Well, you deny it.
Well, I will, and I'll explain why.
Take me through it.
I'm not sure what the question is, but I'll get to the bottom. I'll tell you what my response is.
Do you accept that the thing is a shambles, that the country is split and at sea, the Cabinet is split and at sea, and the government is at sea?
What I accept is that there is a path through this, which is to support the Prime Minister's deal, and the various options, the range of options is narrowing because the House of Commons is voting on different options and rejecting them. Yesterday, the House of Commons rejected leaving without a deal. Today, it rejected having a second referendum, and it also rejected the Labour Party approach.
Which was indicative votes. So they're going to be held next Monday.
There are now 2 options on the table. One is to deliver the Prime Minister's deal, which just can be delivered by the 29th of March or a short technical extension afterwards. Or the alternative to that, as you say, is a long extension,
No,
which
there is
I
one other.
don't
There
want
is one
to
other.
see.
That in fact events turn out in such a way that it ends up we have to remain against the will of half the people in this country. That is one of the accidents which could flow from this. And the Prime Minister has said that herself.
Well, I don't want to see that, John, because I think that would be an affront to democracy. We're a democracy first and foremost, and no matter how people voted, and I voted to remain, I want to deliver on the result of that because I'm a Democrat.
Fine. Do you want to deliver on the government's promise to hold indicative votes as to what people want to happen in Parliament?
We've had votes today on different options. We had a vote on a second referendum.
So no indicative votes. You know what they mean by indicative votes. There are a whole lot of options put out, and the MPs will each be allowed to vote on each of them as they go. Are you going to do that?
There's only one way.
Are you going to do it?
Well, I very much hope not, because there's only one way to get through and deliver on this, the result of the referendum now, without a long delay, and that is to support the Prime Minister's deal. And I very much hope that the House of Commons will vote for that.
Final question. Is our democracy in a robust and wonderful state, or are you deeply ashamed of the shambles that this government has got this country into?
Well, it's certainly a robust democracy. But what I'd say is this. I understand how people have very different and very strongly held views. That's true in the country as a whole. It's true in that place because the Commons essentially reflects the country as a whole. And our task in government has been to listen to people and to try to bring people together and try to get a deal that everybody can broadly back, and then we can get on with it, deliver on Brexit, and then get on with all the rest of the things that we want to achieve.
Secretary of State, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Very good of you. Thank you. Well, now, she promised Conservative MPs that she would step down before the 2022 general election. Now, Theresa May's former policy advisor, George Freeman, has called for her to resign straight away in order to unite the country. But if she does go, who will take over? Various Conservative leadership contenders have been jockeying for position. Our political correspondent, Michael Crick, assesses the runners, the riders.
Wheel of Tory Fortune. The prize, a historic home in Westminster, fame, private chauffeur, generous pay and pension, high security and high insecurity. Let the spinning start for the next Prime Minister. Bookie's favourite, former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, who's lost weight and found a comb. Could he be outflanked, though, by Michael Gove, who's made some strong speeches recently? But will people ever forgive the way last time Gove knifed Johnson in the back? David Davis still thinks he's in with a shout. He's now 70, much older than his rivals, but this morning cleverly showed he's still fit and fast. But a lot of your colleagues do seem to be on manoeuvres, as it were.
Well, you know more about that than I do.
Not at all. You're an expert manoeuvrer yourself.
What would your advice be to them if you're not a contender as to how to carry out these manoeuvres?
My advice to everybody is to be calm about this. This process requires logic and calm.
Davis's former bagman Dominic Raab could run too. Here's Ready for Raab, a social media campaign set up by goodness knows who. Home Secretary Sajid Javid is son of a Muslim bus conductor. He might widen the Tories' appeal, but is no great speaker. While Jeremy Hunt, a Brexiter who voted Remain, is even more keen, a possible compromise, despite recent gaffes. He's been inviting TV crews into the Foreign Office, and note the well-placed flag. But how about another woman? Liz Truss has been on Instagram trying to show a gentler, more natural side. Former Education Secretary Nicky Morgan has long been a Remainer, but seems to have been courting Brexiters recently. Or maybe none of these, suggests a three-time leadership contender, Ken Clarke.
Usually the person who's elected is somebody that nobody thought of until the last 3 or 4 weeks. This can have some very good results. I mean, if anybody had told Margaret Thatcher, let alone anybody else, for the Conservative Party until about a month before she was elected. She'd have been surprised. Everybody was amazed. Most of her colleagues would have.
Perhaps former soldier Johnny Mercer. He boasts he's addressed 150 local Conservative parties, and his Facebook page is full of well-made promo films. And himself out and prefers another grassroots darling, Boris Johnson. And here, at his grand new home, not far from the House of Commons, Jacob Rees-Mogg has actually been holding dinners for Boris Johnson with backbenchers. Mr. Rees-Mogg has told me they're not campaign events, but he admits they are pro-Boris Johnson occasions. And here, amid the fine wine, good food and relaxed ambiance, Boris Johnson has been able to make his pitch. Wheel of Tory fortune, spin away. The victor gets an even bigger gamble, the toughest conundrum in modern history. Brexit.
Michael Crick. Well, Conservative leadership contenders have a close eye on how their voters feel about the party's handling of Brexit. The Surrey town of Egham is in rock-solid Tory territory. It's part of the Chancellor Philip Hammond's constituency. I went there yesterday to see what its residents have to say about the way the government is going about Brexit. Egham, gateway to the home counties, dormitory town for Heathrow. So, how's Brexit going down here?
I don't know where we are. We must be the laughingstock of the world. I thought Donald Trump made America the laughingstock of the world, but I feel that we are now the laughingstock of the world. Our politicians just don't seem to know what they're doing.
So how do you see it ending?
I don't know at the moment. I think I, like many other people, are just in despair. So when the comes, I mean, I did watch it last night on the television, and I just thought this is just ridiculous. No one knows what's happening, and I'm getting to the point where you just turn it off because you just don't. I don't think they know what's going to happen.
Diverse place. The barbers are Turkish. Yes, we could talk to the customers, so long as I had a going over first. Blimey, what's going on in there? Fire and brimstone, then a head rub. How do you feel about the way it's being handled?
It's a joke. It's absolutely pathetic. I'm fed up to the back teeth with it. I think the whole country is. I feel they're just trying to grind us down so we give up.
This feels like Brexit.
It's an absolute joke. I can't believe the government, it's just constant bickering between children, really. It's pathetic.
We're just a laughingstock.
You're the second man to tell me in this part that you're a laughingstock.
It's a laughingstock.
Really?
It's embarrassing.
Did you vote leave or go? Or
I didn't vote.
You didn't vote?
I didn't vote.
Was that a mistake?
It was.
You should have voted?
Yeah.
What would you have voted?
Stay.
Generally speaking, Brexit isn't playing very well in Egham. A kind of fatigue is setting in, making some people question the whole endeavour. Themes emerged out on the Egham streets.
I've lost faith in all the politicians, the whole lot. I don't know what the hell we're doing. We voted to leave, and that's it. We should be leaving. I don't see what all this discussion and argument's all about. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I really don't.
Can you remember anything like it?
No.
I voted out, to be honest with you, to start off with it, and now I'm sort of like regretting that there was no plan in place, and it's all gone tits up, really. So yeah.
So how would you vote now?
I would probably stay. Yeah.
There is an air of fed-upness, and amongst younger people are questioning, why are we doing this to ourselves? Is it all going well?
Obviously not, I don't think. Yeah.
What do you think it says about Britain?
It gives off a bad rep. It makes it look like we've, not in control.
The clouds are gathering over Egham, sunlit for the moment, but if the politicians carry on this way much longer, they may grow dark indeed. They have been warned. Fatigue is setting in.
The date, March the 29th, has been scored into the national psyche for months. Across the UK, all sorts of important decisions, in business especially and in people's ordinary lives, have been altered or put on hold until after Brexit. And yet today, here in the House of Commons, MPs voted to delay it. EU leaders may not agree. If they do, quite how long the delay will be still has to be worked out. And what's more, when MPs vote again on Brexit next week, it will be on Mrs May's original deal for the third time of asking. In the most dramatic of today's votes that split the Conservative Party down the middle, MPs narrowly failed to seize control of the departure process. In the final vote, 7 cabinet ministers voted against the Prime Minister, including the Brexit Secretary himself, Stephen Barclay. He had actually closed the debate on the motion to delay.
Order. Something unusual happened for the Prime Minister today.
The ayes to the right, 412. The noes to the left, 202.
Yes, she won a vote. Except, as usual with Brexit, the victory wasn't what you might call sweet, because she persuaded MPs to back a motion that makes it possible, some might say probable, that Brexit will be delayed at least till the end of June. And it was only a few days ago that the Prime Minister regarded any delay as toxic. And after her so-called victory, which came about even though more Tory MPs voted against her than with her, she was nowhere to be seen. But he jumped to his feet.
After the last few days of government chaos and some defeats, all of us now have the opportunity and the responsibility to work together to find a solution. I also reiterate our support for a public vote, not as a political... Mr. Speaker, not as political point scoring, but as a realistic option to break the deadlock.
Now, perhaps the most important vote of the day was on an amendment put down by this senior Labour MP, who wants all MPs to wrest control from the Prime Minister of what kind of Brexit, if any, we have.
We have to find a way of agreeing a plan that can command majority support. And the Prime Minister is correct when she says that in the end the House must be in favour of something. Now, there are a number of different ways that this can be done, including holding a series of votes on different options.
Now, this Tory former minister may have been speaking for the entire nation.
This is an important debate today, but I have to say I think most people listening to it and watching it in the public are probably losing the will to live, as I am, when it comes to finding a route forward on Brexit.
And here was the Brexit Secretary winding up for the Prime Minister.
It is time for this House to act in the national interest. It is time to put forward an extension that is realistic. I commend the motion put forward by the government.
But guess what? When it came to the actual vote, he voted against his boss, the Prime Minister. Extraordinary. And what about backbenchers' coup, the attempt to take control of shaping Brexit?
The ayes to the right, 312. The noes to the left, 314.
Well, they failed by just 2 votes. So now the Prime Minister will have another attempt to push her plan for Brexit over the line with a third so-called meaningful vote next week. Which fills this former Tory, who tried and failed today to get MPs to support a new referendum, with despair.
We know the Prime Minister's plan is to keep running the clock down until we've got our toes over the edge, and the only option then will be to either back her deal or fall into a catastrophic no deal.
A special emergency cabinet meeting at lunchtime today. The naughty ministers, Amber Rudd, Greg Clark and David Gauke on the left, the Gawkwood squad, who defied the Prime Minister in a vote last night, but against all convention, weren't sacked. This man, the Chief Whip, was furious with them. Now, the Health Secretary is never disloyal.
We've been trying to deliver on the result of the referendum. That's what we're trying to achieve. It is still just possible to do that with the Prime Minister's deal by the 29th of March. And what passed today is the provision to do that, or if necessary, to have a short technical extension. The alternative of a long extension, I think, would be a disaster. People want us to get on with this.
home for a Prime Minister still under the weather, but tonight daring to dream that she may still get her deal through, even though the prospect of us leaving the EU on time is close to nil. Robert Peston, News at 10.
So now we know that MPs will be back here next week to vote again, as Robert was talking about, on Mrs May's deal. But what happens after that here and in Brussels? Libby Wiener takes us through it step by step.
We're very clear. We will be leaving the EU on the 29th of March 2019 at 11 p.m. We will be leaving the European Union on the 29th of March 2019. We're leaving the European Union and we're leaving on the 29th of March 2019.
A date etched on her mind, now likely to be scrubbed out of history. But will delay change anything? One pro-Brexit MP said the Prime Minister should use the time and go back to Brussels and get more concessions.
This is the compression end of the negotiation time period when these things can become possible. But you have to ask for things in a negotiation. You can't just expect people to offer things if you don't even ask for them.
But others suggested that the narrow defeat for Parliament taking control meant the Prime Minister would have to start listening.
Actually gives Parliament the opportunity to do what she's been challenging us to do, which is to tell her what we will agree to, that isn't just her deal, no deal, or no Brexit. There are other alternatives. She's never given the chance for us to vote on them.
So what happens next? It's expected the Prime Minister will bring her deal back to the Commons for a third meaningful vote by next Wednesday. If she wins, she's likely to ask the European Council meeting later that week for a short technical delay. But if she loses again, she may have to ask for a much longer one, well beyond the new departure date that MPs voted for today. One Tory MP had this message for his colleagues tonight: forget the bickering and just back the deal.
We need to deliver on Brexit. We need to deliver on the mandate that the British people gave us in 2016. We said we would respect their decision. They told us what they wanted. We need to get on. We need to implement it. Some Julie Garland Brexit, that's something that's always somewhere over the rainbow, is no good to us.
But winning tonight's votes will have provided some relief for the Prime Minister, according to one former advisor.
Actually, you enjoy these moments when it seems like a little bit of an upside. So possibly she's having a G&T, a wry smile with the rest of the team as they go through yet another day. And then it's straight into planning, and how do you move forward from that?
Not losing, the definition of a good day for Theresa May now. Libby Wiener, News at 10, Westminster.
So that's the timetable of the next few days. The timetable for the UK's departure now, as Libby says, rests with European leaders. Our Europe editor, James Mates, is in Brussels to take us through, James, what the reaction has been so far from the EU tonight.
It's pretty mixed. They've known this has been coming. Now it's here. It's completely clear this decision is not in our hands. The EU Commission's statement in the light of the vote reminded London that this decision requires unanimity. They said they will give priority to the functioning of the EU institutions, not to Britain's needs, and that they will take into account the reasons for and the duration of such an extension. And other voices are making similar sceptical noises. Mark Rutte, the Dutch Prime Minister. Theresa May has no better friend here in Europe than Mark Rutte. He spoke about how London had been whining on and going around in circles, and asked about this extension for what and to what end. So that gives you a pretty good idea of the scepticism. Some of it also concern about what Britain would do during an extension period when it would retain a veto and voting power. Europe is about to have to set itself a new budget for the next few years. It doesn't want Britain being difficult during that, because they've left it with veto power over their budget process.
So what happens then, James, when she turns up next week in Brussels?
A lot will depend on whether she's asking for a short or a long extension. The long extension may be more problematic. Now, Donald Tusk, who is the President of the Council, he was the one who will try and get a unanimous view around that table in here in 1 week's time. He said tonight, I will appeal to the EU27 to open a long discussion if the UK finds it necessary to rethink its Brexit strategy. And that's going to be crucial. They are going to say to Mrs May, when she turns up, what are you going to do with this time, this extra year or whatever it's going to take? Because if they are not convinced that there is something that is substantially going to change, there is a very real chance that they'll say, no, we're not prepared to go through another year, 18 months, 2 years of this. And she would leave here, much as she left that Salzburg summit a month or two ago, with nothing, facing the fact that 1 week after she leaves here, Britain will be leaving, however Westminster votes.
James, thank you very much for that. Well, the Prime Minister is no doubt up to her ears in advice on a way forward today. She got a little bit more. The unmistakably blunt thoughts of President Trump came booming across the Atlantic. During a meeting in the White House with Ireland's Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, he said he was surprised at how badly the Brexit negotiations had gone. If only Mrs May had listened to him, he said.
Ahead of St Patrick's Day celebrations, the Irish Taoiseach was visiting the White House, and it gave the President the chance to weigh in on Brexit, candidly admitting that, like so many others, he is struggling to understand what on earth is going on.
He's in a very complicated position right now because of Brexit. You're going to have to tell me what's happening. I'm going to have to perhaps tell the world what's happening, because I'm not sure anybody knows, but it's a very complex thing that's going on right now. It's tearing a country apart. It's actually tearing a lot of countries apart. And it's a shame that it has to be that way. But
after that stark assessment of an ally's political predicament, he then assailed the Prime Minister's negotiating tactics, although he shares her view about how unwise a second referendum would be.
I'm surprised at how badly it's all gone from the standpoint of a negotiation. But I gave the Prime Minister my ideas on how to negotiate it, and I think you would have been successful. She didn't listen to that, and that's fine. I mean, she's got to do what she's got to do, but I think it could have been negotiated in a different manner, frankly. I hate to see it everything being ripped apart right now. I don't think another vote would be possible, because it would be very unfair to the people that won. They'd say, what do you mean you're going to take another vote? So that'll be tough.
We have a different opinion, President. I regret that Brexit's happening, and the UK was a really important part of the European Union, but they're going now, and that's their decision.
The two leaders were then on Capitol Hill, meeting prominent Irish-American lawmakers. But here, too, there is no greater clarity on where Britain is heading. The President's description of the UK as being ripped and torn apart is pretty extraordinary, but it does reflect the bafflement in Washington about Brexit and Britain's reputation for political pragmatism and institutional stability that now is in serious jeopardy. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
Well, to help us digest this third day of unprecedented drama here in Westminster, here's Robert Peston. As we've been hearing, Theresa May is bringing back this deal for a third time next week. There are questions about whether she should be allowed to do that in the first place. What chances has she got of getting it through?
Well, as you know, Julie, if these were normal circumstances, that would be the nuttiest of questions. I mean, pretty much the deal she's going to put to them next, we think, Tuesday, is a deal she put to them a few weeks ago, and she lost by 230 votes, a record. And then she put it to them again a few days ago and lost by 149 votes, which is also enormous by all standards. So she's got to persuade 75 MPs to change their minds. Now, I'm not saying that's impossible, but it's only a bit more likely than the England football team picking me to be their centre forward. OK, let's just park that thought with your football metaphors there. If she fails, then what next? So, she has to go to an EU Council, a meeting with other EU leaders at the end of next week, and she would, according to the motion that was passed today, she would have to ask them for an extension to Brexit. Now, my EU sources say they will then turn to her and say, well, what's it for? And she'll say, I'm not 100% sure, because we don't actually know what kind of Brexit we want. She'll then come back to this country, and on Monday she has promised that she will start the process of sounding out MPs about whether there is a form of Brexit that they could coalesce around, or indeed if they want a referendum. And then there could well be an emergency summit at the end of that week, literally a day or so before we're due to crash out the EU. The honest answer, as I've said too many times on this programme and elsewhere, is we don't know where we are going. We do know today, I think, that we are not crashing out on the 29th of March and that there almost certainly will be a delay. But whether we ever get a managed Brexit is still uncertain. We could get a referendum. And just to be clear, my central prognosis is still, in the absence of those people over there making up their minds about what they want, a no-deal Brexit at some point, maybe a few months away, is still a very real risk.
Because it is the default and it's worth underlining.
Because it is the default position, and the Prime Minister's made absolutely clear she will not eliminate that default.
OK, so back here for the big vote early next week. Robert,
Can't wait.
Thank you very much. I bet you can't, Robert. Thank you very much indeed for now for that. So 3 days of intense activity in the hothouse behind us here, but how is what is happening here playing out away from Westminster? Well, we've been to the rather fresher atmosphere of Grimsby, where if you think just a week ago, you'll remember Mrs May gave a speech in a town that voted overwhelmingly for Brexit. Then she was urging MPs to support her deal and get it done. Well, the people we spoke to today on both sides of the argument agree that they should do just that.
The once lively streets of Grimsby have changed beyond recognition since Phil began driving his taxi 2 decades ago. Working people struggle here, and Phil's followed every twist as Brexit's unfolded, desperate for it to be delivered on the 29th of March.
The ayes to the right, 412. The noes to the left, 202.
Oh my God. That sounds like the end of Brexit.
That was your big fear, Brexit slipping away?
Yeah, it is. It is for a lot of people, especially in Grimsby.
He drops me at the town hall where locals are debating Brexit.
It is a load of nonsense. This Project Fear is a con.
But Remainers feel just as cheated now the delay comes with another meaningful vote.
My worry is that on the third vote, perhaps more people are going to go her way, and then will she have a fourth vote, and then a few more people will go her way, and in which case then we will be stuck with leaving the European Union, which is not what I want to happen.
But hers is a lonely voice here, and this is why. Down on the dock, the fishing boats that used to fill this place reduced to a handful. But the auction house is still busy, selling largely imported fish. It's precise, fast-moving, a million miles from the toing and froing in Westminster. No wonder they watch with despair as the countless votes and endless amendments there pile up.
We've gone from the meaningful vote to the meaningless vote. It's complete political paralysis and a constitutional constipation. I don't know what the answer is, but they're actually making a pig's ear of it.
As artisan producers supplying top restaurants, at this smokehouse they like to think they're showing the rest of the world how it's done. Owner Patrick believes our politicians could have done the same, rather than hanging Brexit voters out to dry.
We've unified Europe, so we've made them sort of club together, despite the fact half of them are dysfunctional and poor and broke, and actually all we've done is solidify that, and we've made a right mess of it.
And the result of that?
Europe was really bad, and still is, and we've made it look really great.
At the local sewing club, how you vote is immaterial and patience is prized. But even here, after this week in politics, it's finally run out.
The politicians haven't done what Joe Public asked them to do. It's like spoilt children. I don't like it, so I'm not playing. They're not looking after us who put them in office.
Furious at Parliament's attempts to seize power from the Prime Minister, great-grandmother Erica feels like our democracy is unravelling.
I don't feel very proud being British right now, no. I've always been proud. I mean, my family's always in the forces and things like that, and we've been proud, but I don't feel at all proud now. And I feel as if our ancestors would be looking in horror if they could see what was going on.
While the Prime Minister may now have more time to rescue her deal, patience here has frayed to its very limits. Rachel Younger, News at 10, Grimsby.
After a feverish series of votes, including one in which Parliament was just 2 votes away from wrenching control of the Brexit process from Theresa May, the government got Parliament's backing to ask the EU to delay Brexit past March the 29th. It's been a frenetic week. As MPs head back to their constituencies, let's just remind ourselves what's actually happened. On Tuesday, Theresa May held a second vote on her Brexit deal. MPs voted overwhelmingly not to pass that deal, 242 votes to 391. On Wednesday, MPs rejected a no-deal Brexit under any circumstance. But remember, this is an advisory vote. It didn't change the law of the land, which still says we will leave on March the 29th. Today, the Commons voted to pass an extension of Article 50, mandating Theresa May to go back to Brussels and ask for more time, therefore delaying Brexit, making it unlikely the UK will exit the EU on the 29th of March. So what now? Two options stand out. Brexit could be delayed to the 30th of June if MPs pass her withdrawal deal in another meaningful vote next week. If that vote fails and MPs reject her deal again, then she'll ask Brussels for a longer extension, possibly up to 2 years. But remember, any extension will need to be agreed by the 27 other EU member states. Without an agreement in Brussels or Westminster, Britain will leave 2 weeks tomorrow without a deal. Nick Watt was in Parliament today for the drama's latest instalment.
Ducking, diving and surviving for now. Theresa May at last tasted victory.
The ayes to the right, 412. The noes to the left, 202.
And by a whopping margin, as MPs voted to extend Article 50. But there was a sting. Delaying Brexit was once unthinkable to the Prime Minister and was today rejected by more than half of her MPs. A number of cabinet ministers also declined to side with the Prime Minister in the free vote, including the Brexit Secretary, shortly after he spoke in favour of her motion.
It is time for this House to act in the national interest. It is time to put forward an extension that is realistic. I commend the motion put forward by the government to the House.
Theresa May did narrowly defeat an attempt to wrest control of Parliament, but at a price. MPs could be given a chance to consider other Brexit options if her deal is rejected in a third vote next week.
Good day in the office today.
A grizzled chief whip is eyeing victory next week.
These indicative votes, that's quite a big moment, isn't it?
Who's mentioning indicative votes?
Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster.
Well, indicative votes are avoiding the decision Britain needs to make, which is to deliver the result of the referendum and deliver on the government's deal.
And you're really, obviously there's going to be another vote on the Prime Minister's deal next week. Do you think it's going your way? Do you think the DUP are moving?
I look forward to having a successful week next week.
One Whitehall hand described the Prime Minister's approach as her rope-a-dope strategy, losing your way to victory, in the style of Muhammad Ali's Rumble in the Jungle. But there's also the small matter of a government to run. Secretaries of State, Secretary of Peace and Harmony.
29 still happening. Are we still leaving our mark?
Do we have happiness around the cabinet table?
We always have happiness around the cabinet table.
Supporters were relieved by today's wins.
So a reprieve for the Prime Minister this evening, but it's time for my colleagues actually to wake up and smell the coffee and accept the reality of where we are now at.
I'm somebody who argued for Remain, who thinks that the best deal we have still is our current relationship with the EU, but I respect the democratic vote, and I really think that colleagues have to accept now that a no-deal, cliff-edge Brexit is off the menu.
Votes that we definitely
Critics were unimpressed.
And I think what is happening is that the Prime Minister is basically just bashing people into submission. We know that one MP said he felt as if he got a gun against his head last night, and there are others who just think, you know, she's just carries on and she carries on and she carries on. She doesn't listen, and they will be in a position where they'll have no alternative to vote for her deal, even think they think it's bad for their constituents.
How any of this could be positioned as a victory for the Prime Minister is unthinkable. My constituents still in this limbo, still in this uncertainty, will not see anything that's happening here in the House of Commons as any kind of victory. We are now in a position where we're having to ask for an extension of Article 50 because 2.5 years apparently to try and negotiate a withdrawal agreement isn't long enough. I mean, what kind of situation are we in?
I've always thought that when push comes to shove, the European Council will give us an extension because do they want to be to blame for a no-deal Brexit? I don't think they do, and therefore I think they will
But the responsibility on us is to now come together to see if we can find a way forward.
Tory Brexiteers warn the Prime Minister she must deliver major changes to her deal to secure their support.
The numbers are so overwhelmingly against it at the moment. It lost by 230, as you know, the first time, 149 the last time. These are very big numbers. There has to be something very substantial for that to change in a sufficient way for that deal to get passed. So that's the challenge for the EU and the Prime Minister, to get that done. But unless she asks them for it, of course they're not going to give it.
A rare moment of relief for the Prime Minister, but battle will soon be resumed.
And Nick is here now. So was this a better day for Theresa May?
Yes, it was a better day. It's interesting, I was talking to one cabinet minister who said it was a brilliant whipping operation, so that's praise there for the Chief Whip, Julian Smith. But there could be trouble ahead. You'll have seen him in my film being very dismissive of this idea of indicative votes. This is, can Parliament find an alternative if her deal is voted down? Now, a number of MPs today didn't defeat her on the basis of an undertaking that there would be such a vote. And there you've got the Chief Whip saying that it's not a very sensible idea. Also, you would have seen in my film Gavin Williamson saying a happy cabinet table. It was anything but happy. It was very testy. The Prime Minister ticked off ministers for leaking from the cabinet. But some ministers seemed to think it was rather funny. I spoke to one who said, "Oh dear, I'm on the naughty step."
Yeah, because in fact, they think they can do what they want.
That's right. I mean, there were a number of ministers who could abstain in a three-line whip vote, and they kept their jobs.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. Well, so if this is a Parliament riven, then certainly it's a cabinet riven, completely divided, happy to show itself as so, as Nick's just been saying. Earlier, I spoke to the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, and asked him whether he wanted to apologise to the country for the chaos we've seen in Westminster this week.
No, I think we've still got the chance to deliver, and I very much hope that we can. That's what I've been voting for all the way through this, delivering on the result of the referendum in a way that supports the economy but makes sure that we respect that result. And I think people just want us to get on with it. When I talk to constituents, when I talk to people in the NHS, they want us to get on with it.
Here's the thing, it's about, this whole business has been about the anatomy of much of anything else of your cabinet. Let's look at yesterday. Amber Rudd, David Gauke, David Mundell, Greg Clark, all cabinet ministers defied Theresa May and abstain on a no-deal Brexit. They weren't censured, I understand. They got away with that. That was allowed. Is that right?
Well, lots of people have got very strong views. The thing that the Cabinet is completely united on, and it was made even clear in our discussion when we met today, is that the best thing for the country is delivering on the deal. I keep returning to that because that is what's in the national interest, to deliver on the referendum result. And then this evening there was also a free vote, and cabinet ministers voted different ways. That's what happens in a free vote. And the goal of all of us in the cabinet is to deliver this deal.
You have a cabinet. 4 senior members of that cabinet yesterday abstain against Theresa May's wishes. Today you have a vote on the extension of Article 50, which Theresa May backs. Voting against that motion was Gavin Williamson, Liam Fox, Andrea Leadsom, Chris Grayling. The Chief Whip abstained. And the most bizarre looking glass world of all is the Brexit Secretary, Stephen Barclay, spoke to the motion of extending Article 50 and voted against. Now, what are people in the country to make of that? That's a cabinet in chaos.
No. The Cabinet
is... Well, what would be chaos? I'd love to know.
The Cabinet is very clear, the government is very clear, we want to deliver the PM's deal. However, if you're telling me that lots of people have got really strong views on this subject, I wouldn't call that news, Kirsty. Everybody knows it.
If Meaningful Vote 3 is defeated, David Lidington, the de facto deputy leader, said there would be a series of indicative votes after the failure of Meaningful Vote 3.
I want to see Meaningful Vote 3 succeed, and all the way through this process, I've always been clear on what we need to do, which is look at the vote in front of us. You know, there have been endless votes in this process, and the question you've got to ask when you come up to each one is, what is in the national interest? And all the way through, I've been asked questions about, and if this happens, and if that happens, what happens next? And my response all the way through has been, what is the choice in front of us now? And the choice is either get this deal done, or we'll end up in a delay that I think would be a disaster, because what people want to see is us getting on with it.
If you have your deputy leader saying that if meaningful vote 3 fails, there'll be a series of indicative votes, the public, not us, the public, have the right to ask, is that going to be true or not? And you won't even discuss it. I'm asking, you're a cabinet minister. He said that if meaningful vote 3 fails, there'll be a series of indicative votes which will follow, which will give an idea of what people might coalesce around. You saying that's not happening?
I'm saying I don't want to see that happen.
But it will be happening if there's a failure in meaningful vote 3. Are you absolutely clear on that?
Well, that's what David Lidington said, but it doesn't mean that it's a good idea.
No.
The good idea is to deliver on the deal and get on with it. This is the sense that the country has very strongly now.
If your Brexit secretary speaks about the value of an extension to Article 50 and vote against it.
He explained what was in the motion, and he made his... then he cast his vote in a free vote. But the other thing that the House of Commons did this evening was also had votes on should the timetable of the House of Commons be taken over by the Commons from the government, and that was rejected. Should we have a second referendum? That was emphatically rejected. Should we follow the Jeremy Corbyn plan? That was rejected. There are now only 2 options left.
There is a way that this government could get Brexit through straight away. 240 votes in Labour for a full customs union. That only takes the payroll Tory vote and a few others, and you've actually delivered Brexit.
But when you're looking at these votes and when you're deciding on government policy in a critical matter, you've got to look at what's in the national interest. And the downsides of a customs union mean that we would be in a position that policy is set for the UK that the UK wouldn't have control over. And as the 5th largest country in the world, with our proud history and the great opportunities we have in the future once we can get this settled, that is not a sustainable position.
Well, it might be not sustainable,
so
but
it's not in the national
people,
interest.
Well, a lot of people think it is in the national interest. What is worse for you? Is it a customs union, or is it a long, long delay to exiting?
Well, the only option, if we don't have the Prime Minister's deal, is that long delay. And
unless you have these indicative votes which suggest there's another way.
No, because we'd have to, any other different deal would have to be negotiated with the EU, and the EU are clear that the only option on the table is the deal that the PM's negotiated.
Matt Hancock. We're joined now by Vince Cable, who has tonight announced that he'll be stepping down as leader of the Liberal Democrats. From the Conservatives, the ERG member, Shailesh Vara, and the Labour Shadow Work and Pensions Minister, Jack Dromey. Good evening to you all. Vince Cable, first of all, you're the big news tonight. You said you would step down after Brexit. Is there something you know that we don't?
Well, I said I would step down after various things that happened. Brexit may go on forever, but I had said I would step down after the local government election, which is the next big political event, and my motives of I set out in the autumn. I want an orderly kind of professional succession, and I think we're doing it the right way.
But it would be fair to say, though, that it's not the Liberal Democrats that have been in the spotlight with the kind of central position. It has been the new TIG group that's taken a lot of the oxygen, that you haven't made the headlines that you really should have made as a long-standing party.
No, we haven't, but we've made a lot of steady progress after 2 very difficult general elections, and I'd like to think that's a sort of positive legacy. And I think we'll build on it in May. But as far as the TIG group are concerned, I've welcomed their breakaway from the 2 parties. I think it's a healthy sign. They're basically decaying structures. It's got to happen. I think there is the potential for the formation of a major movement, bringing together the social democratic, the liberal traditions.
Existing political parties are decaying structures, really.
Well, I think we're talking about Labour and the Conservative. We've got very deep splits, certainly not us.
Right. No. Would you like to see a woman lead the Liberal Democrats?
I think it would be a good step, and we've got some good women. We've also got good men. I'm not picking sides, but yeah, I mean, we certainly have the female talent as well as the male talent.
One of the things that has, dogged the Liberal Democrats in recent years has been, all the problems over the late Cyril Smith and child abuse. And tonight, you have suspended David Steele from the party following the inquiry, and he spoke at the inquiry. So why do you feel the need to suspend him?
Well, the decision was taken by our decision makers in Scotland. He's a member of the Scottish Party. There was very serious concern about what he said, serious allegations. They've got to be investigated. And I think the proper procedure which has been followed is that he is suspended while these investigations take place. And we take it very seriously. And
it's about who knew what when.
Yes.
And I wonder if it is to the eternal shame of the party that this was not sorted out a long time ago.
Well, we thought it had been sorted out a long time ago. I don't know what these comments amount to, what the allegations are. We've got to investigate it properly, and we are doing, and the Scottish Party has taken the right steps to suspend him, and I think they've acted quickly, properly, and in an orderly way. I think it's quite impressive.
Well, let's talk about Brexit and begin with Shailesh Vara first of all. You voted against the deal twice. If nothing materially different happens in the deal, if Geoffrey Cox's legal advice is exactly as it was last week, will you be voting against the meaningful vote next week?
Could I first of all pay tribute to Vince, because he's had a hugely impressive political career, and I think that Parliament will be at a loss for his leadership there, and I wish him well in all that he does, because he's been at the helm for a very long time, and I'm sure there's a long list of things he wishes to do with more time. As far as your issue is concerned, Kirsty, I think we need to start with the mandate that the public gave us. 17.4 million people in the biggest exercise of democracy in our country's history. And they told Parliament, all of us, from whatever party, that they wanted to leave the European Union. What the agreement before us does, it doesn't leave properly. I stood on the Conservative Party manifesto, page 36. It says quite clearly that we will seek to leave the European Union, including the single market, including the customs union. What we have here with withdrawal agreement is that we would be permanently locked in the backstop, and effectively the EU would be telling us what to do. We would have no say on those rules.
But that means that you will then be voting, if indeed what is in front of Parliament this next week is the same as what it was in front of Parliament this week, you'll vote against again.
Kirsty, it was Harold Wilson who said a week is a long time in politics.
But
now,
it's about
of course,
principle.
every day. Now a day is a long time in politics.
But it's about principle.
So
it's about principle.
No, what I'm saying is that we have a moving field at the moment. We have no idea what the position is going to be like next week. The EU, historically, with almost every international deal, changes its mind at the last moment. So let's just wait and see what happens.
Jack Dromey, you saw there about what happened with David Liddington saying that, following next week's meaningful vote, if it is voted down, there would be indicative votes. And that was put to him because the Hilary Benn amendment on indicative votes fell. And the reason it did not pass was because some of your number voted against, which suggests that, the divisions in the Labour Party for all the electorate to see are as difficult as they are in the Conservative Party.
We have our differences of opinion, but it's nothing compared to the omni-shambles we saw today on the part of government. 188 members of the government voting against their own motion after the Brexit secretary had moved the motion, saying please vote for it, and then promptly voted against it. And the problem is the country is drifting to disaster. And crucially, therefore, three things. First, 3 times now, Parliament has voted no to no deal. Second, we cannot crash out on the 29th, and I think the Prime Minister is now conceding that. But thirdly, it's then crucially the responsibility of Parliament to come together across party. Theresa May's got to emerge blinking out of her bunker and engage across Parliament in a way she's not done in the last 2 years.
Do you think, Vince Cable, that the Liberal Democrats did not push for that position hard enough? That, in fact, there was this talk that there would be much more cooperation, and it never materialised to the very last minute.
We're talking about the people's vote. Well, we were let down today because Jeremy Corbyn's people abstained. I mean, having promised to support it, they didn't, and that's
but the
reflects
people's
badly
vote
on them.
themselves said, we back the people's vote in principle, but this is not the right time. It wasn't the right time.
Well,
suggested.
I'm not sure what they mean. I mean, waiting for Jeremy Corbyn has never been a great idea.
Do you think they lost an opportunity?
I think he should have voted. He said he was going to, but didn't. But anyway, I think it's irrelevant because although it was important we had a show today and we voted with what we believed, I think the people's vote will actually come from the government side, not from the opposition. I think we'll get to a point where Theresa May loses 3rd time, 4th time, who knows. Eventually the penny will drop that the only chance they have of getting this deal through is to take it to the country. They've got a 50-50 chance in a referendum, and it will be in their interest to do it. And
if
it will
they do
be
that,
the only way out.
then you're not going to get the hard Brexit, are
I
you?
think we need to recognise that, you know, a second referendum, well, is it going to be best of three then? What happens if the other side wins this time?
It's a referendum on a new set of facts.
And we're told that, you know, there are a new set of facts now. Referendum 1, it was very simple. Leave or stay. Now we have a 585-page legal document, along with legal advice from Geoffrey Cox. Are people really going to be able to understand this 585-page legal document more so than they did before? It's absolutely true, Jack Dromey, that what on earth would be on the ballot paper. And the thing is that then these 17.5 million people will feel absolutely let down. We're back at square one.
Yes, and you made the point, which is right. It's irrelevant in terms of the immediate, because what we've got to focus on, because otherwise the consequences are going to be increasingly catastrophic, is how does Parliament come together to agree a deal, a genuinely better deal for Britain, not her deal, which will keep not going through Parliament.
But you have, what leverage do you have? Because latterly, of course, Jeremy Corbyn said he would happily speak to Theresa May, and indeed there have been conversations, but you don't have any leverage.
There's a growing consensus in Parliament around the importance of doing a deal. And so, for example, a growing consensus around customs union, customs arrangements. And that's very welcome, because I've got the Jaguar plant in my constituency and I know how important this is to the automotive sector. So the focus has got to be that her deal will not go through, but the idea that we can continue to drift on would be catastrophic for tens of thousands of workers. So that's the focus. A good deal for Britain.
I think, first of all, if I may just clarify, Jack, on one thing. You know, there are car manufacturers that have had difficulties. Almost all of them have said it's got nothing to do with Brexit. And I think we need to talk about facts. I think
they've said that the consequences would be catastrophic. In their words, catastrophic.
They said they could be, but they're not, that's not the reason why they're leaving.
So you know more about making cars than the people who make cars.
Actually, Jack, I listen to the people who are running the car plants, and I take on board what they say,
well.
and I don't mix their words and put in my own nuance. So if you listen to the interviews that the leaders of the car manufacturing firms have done recently, you will find that they do not blame Brexit, and it's important that we don't unnecessarily do some scaremongering out there. It is also important to remember that we have a commitment to leave on the 29th of March. If we delay it, we're simply going to kick the can down the road. The problems won't go away.
If the DUP come to an agreement with Theresa May over voting next Wednesday for the meaningful vote, will you fall in behind the DUP? There'd be no reason not to fall in behind the DUP, would there be?
Well, I take very seriously what the DUP say and do, because they are from Northern Ireland, and of course they know that area better than most other people. But I have to say that let us wait and see. I'm not going to come to any judgment right now, because it is a fast-moving field, and we have to wait and see what happens later on. But I don't think that kicking the can down the road is the right way forward.
Neither is a no-deal Brexit, which would be catastrophic and make our country poorer for a generation.
Thank you all very much indeed. So Theresa May on our behalf, will have to go cap in hand to the EU27 and ask for their unanimous approval for our perhaps short delay to exiting, or as we said, a longer delay of perhaps up to 2 years, while we rethink the whole deal or call the whole deal off. The EU Council President Donald Tusk has already said he would appeal to the EU leaders to be open to a long extension. But that would certainly mean the UK taking part in the next European parliamentary elections in May. This is what the European Parliament's Brexit negotiator, Guy de Verhofstadt, has tweeted tonight. Why should the European Council allow an extension if the UK government and a majority in the House of Commons are not ready for a cross-party approach to break the current deadlock? Well, I'm joined now by Norbert Röttgen, who is a close ally of Angela Merkel and chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Bundestag. Good evening, Mr. Röttgen. Thank you very much for joining us.
Good evening.
Do you agree with Guy de Verhofstadt that actually what you would like to see is a cross-party coalition in Britain getting together to sort this out?
I think it's not upon the Europeans to say how British parliamentarians should behave. I think it's now upon us to provide for clarity. I think the negotiations are over. They are done and dusted. And now the Parliament in Britain has to come to terms. And certainly the Europeans want to be helpful. So if a delay, a longer or shorter delay, could be helpful, I do not have any doubt that this will be granted by the European Council, because we want to contribute what we can, what is possible on our side, that in this very divided, emotional, political struggle and fight, eventually Britain comes to a decision.
There's two things there I want to ask you. First of all, on the long and the short delay. So the short delay is what that Theresa May would be asking for if she got her meaningful vote through next week and needed time to tidy up technically. If she doesn't get it through and goes for up to 2 years, you think that there would be a unanimous support for that, because it has to be unanimous in the EU 27?
Yes, of course, it has to be unanimous. And I do not want to speculate what, in terms of months or even years, a long delay might mean. I would say a long delay until end of the year, or 1 year, 12 months or so. I think this would be quite a long period of time to come to terms to decide upon it, because we have to see this means also uncertainty, and uncertainty is not good for politics, not good for the economy. So I think end of the year, 12 months, this could be imagined and considered as a long period.
And rather than, because originally what was being talked about was the EU, this is the only deal on the table, and the EU would only grant a long extension if there's a prospect of another deal. But what we might be talking about is not actually having the formulation of any other deal, but the EU would just sit and let us play that out. Without anything coming back to the EU, would the EU make any demands?
I think what is clear from the European side is that there is a deal which we have agreed on, and there will be not any change at all to this deal. But what we see clearly is that Parliament in Britain is not up to decide. They need more time.
If it was pivoting to a softer Brexit, if it was pivoting to a softer Brexit, that would go down well with the EU 27.
Now, I do not see that there is any kind of other Brexit, different to that which has been agreed on. So there is no way of having a softer even Brexit than it was agreed on. I think we are quite clear. We have had the negotiations. They are over. We have a deal. And now I think we want, as Europeans, to be helpful, that Britain as a country or the British Parliament will take a decision on that. And if, for example, a referendum were taken on that, this would of course take time, and then this time required and needed for organizing a referendum would be given and granted. I have no doubt on that.
Thank you. Well, just very briefly, your view then on the European elections in May, if it was anything other than a technical extension for tidying things up, you would think that the UK would have to take part or not in these European elections. If it was up to a year, for example, presumably you would want the UK to take part.
I think there is no doubt that British citizens have the right, the constitutional right, to take part in these European elections as long and if and when Britain is a member state of the European Union. And you can't deny and you can't deprive British citizens of that right.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight.